that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided when we are broadcasting.
Just one moment, Chair. I can confirm, Chair, that we are now live streaming.
Thank you. So welcome to the meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. I'm not aware of anyone. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please could members speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum, and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. So, we have online joining us remotely today Anna Eccleston, who's the Co-optee Parent Governor, and Jan Francis, who's the Co-optee Families Representative. I'll ask Anna if you can confirm that you can hear us and check that we can hear you. Good afternoon, Anna.
Yeah. Hi, yeah, I can hear you, no problem.
That's great, thank you. And Jan, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, yes, I can hear you.
That's great, thank you very much. Any members of the committee or co-optees with voting rights who join the meeting remotely are not able to vote on any resolutions of the committee but may otherwise participate in the debate. Do we have anybody else joining us remotely today? No, nobody that we're aware of. We also have a number of officers and other attendees present, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves when we come to the specific items if needed, please. The committee clerk has sent apologies for any confusion caused by dating error in the original published agenda pack, which incorrectly stated that today's meeting was scheduled for the 14th of March 2024. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've received an apology from Sam Prattley of the Diocese of Hereford.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies?
None that we're aware of.
All right, thank you. Have we had any members nominated to attend the meeting in place of a member of the committee?
No.
Okay, thank you. Do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest in respect of any items on the agenda? No?
No.
Okay. So, if we move to the minutes, to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January 2024. It's been noted that in the minutes that the minutes did not record that Jan Francis, who's the family's representative co-optee, sent apologies for not being able to attend the committee meeting on the 23rd of January. Are there any other proposed corrections for accuracy? No? So, can the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January be agreed as a correct record, subject to the inclusion of Jan Francis as having given apologies? And if I can sign the minutes of that meeting as approved, please. Right. Have we received any written questions from members of the public?
No questions received.
Thank you. And are there any questions from members of the council?
No, there have been no questions received.
Right. Well, we'll move then to item 7 on the agenda, which is the corporate parenting service, and a report providing an overview and update in respect of the Herefordshire Corporate Parenting Board. Am I right in thinking that this will be led and introduced by Rachel Gillett, Service Director for Safeguarding and Family Support? Thank you, Rachel.
Hello, I'm here to discuss the corporate parenting service and to give Scrutiny an update on the progress made since 2018. Scrutiny asked a number of questions: how many looked after children we had, how those numbers have changed, how we're doing in comparison to statistical neighbours, and what were the external factors and the internal factors which had an effect on those numbers. Also, where the children were placed, as in what type of placement they were in. The history of Herefordshire Children's Services is set out, and you can see that from a high in 2022-23, we had 412 children in our care, and this is reduced to 396. We recognise that this is still high in relation to West Midlands and statistical neighbours, but it's on the right trajectory. For those children who were Herefordian children, there were 381 in February 23, and that's now dropped to 360, which is a positive move. This has been due to significant work done in our pre-proceedings. So pre-proceedings are what we do prior to going into issue proceedings with the family to say we believe that your child should be in care or we would have parental responsibility. Our rate of pre-proceedings now, with work with our legal teams, is now that of statistical neighbours. We're also working more restoratively with families, and we're preventing those proceedings by taking place at an earlier point with a number of family group conferences. Our family group conference service has done 29 family group conferences in the last 3 months, and that allows families to come up with their own solutions rather than and to work as a plan together. We're also reunifying a number of children and supporting families to be together, and currently we have 29 children who are placed with their parents. 17 children who were due to come into care in the last quarter stayed at home with support for ECHO, and ECHO is our team that is the Edge of Care team that supports families with systemic therapy or with drug and alcohol workers to support that child staying at home. We've seen a significant increase in vulnerable unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, some that have come through from the transfer scheme. You'll know nationally the challenges that the boats crossing the Channel and other areas have caused for England per se, and you'll also know about the hotels that were opened in Herefordshire. We have gone from 2%, which is just 6 children in 2022, to 38, which is 9% at this current time. The Home Office does give us some contribution towards those children's care, but it doesn't cover the costs and it doesn't cover it post-18. However, we have a responsibility to those children that have had terrible and difficult lives before they got here. For the children that are in placements, we have 111 in foster care, that's external foster care, and 92 in-house. But one of our areas of strength and continues to be is the number that we have placed in family and friends care. So that's where the child knows the person that we've placed them with. That strength continues on through into our leaving care service because that gives them stability, and the majority of those children stay with their family and friends care, as known as a staying put. That's what the term is, it's called staying put. We've got 44 children in residential. Although those numbers have fluctuated and are reviewed regularly, you will know that the costs for those placements are significantly higher, and it's a national challenge to try and bring those costs down. We have seen some positives in that budget moving in the right direction, but we continue to step down young people from residential. We are continuing to recruit foster carers in-house and working with our kinship carers, and they get paid the same amount at the basic level. Once they move through the scheme, foster carers can get higher payments than is noted in this paper. However, for kinship and first-line in-house carers, that's what they are paid. Placement sufficiency is a key priority, and we refreshed the sufficiency strategy really, but all can help as a corporate parent to promote foster care and for our children in care. We're supported by Leeds and our restorative practice model to work alongside families and children and carers, but we believe the numbers of children in care will continue to decrease.
Thank you, Rachel. And I just forgot to point out actually about acronyms. I was asked by committee members, so if anybody does have an acronym, if you can please just explain what that is, and so that everybody can understand. Thank you for that presentation. I think if I could start off, and then if anybody can indicate if they'd like to speak. It's become very clear over the past couple of years that restorative practice is about developing positive relationships, and it's accepted nationally and internationally as an effective way in achieving better outcomes for children, young people, and families. So, and this is certainly something that the Commissioner Elena Brazil is advocating as well for Herefordshire. How is this approach actually changing the corporate parenting service in Herefordshire? You've sort of explained a bit, but do you think that it is making a significant difference to how children are experience the care system?
We're at the first part of our journey. All staff for the first part of this have been trained. It is something that needs to be cascaded out across partners and across the whole of Herefordshire Council. However, do I think it's making a difference? Absolutely. It sets a clear framework that we're working with families and not to families, that we are working alongside them. Now, there's lots of things that need to change within our particular area. For example, our systems need to, and our forms and everything that we do needs to change and work in a more restorative way so that the language that is set out is restorative. Many of our current forms are, and we're just reducing them, are for signs of safety. So you would mark someone on the signs of safety, whereas in restorative practice you would say, what do we need to do to make this better? What would you need to do? What would we need to do? So it's a very different way of working. But do I think it's cascaded all the way through yet? We're seeing some evidence, but not of it being consistently across the piece, would be my view.
Okay, thank you. Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Just to give a bit of background, I'm on the fostering panel, so I'm particularly interested in the fostering side. And I have a few questions about that. And first one is about the kinship cases, which is both fostering and being put with family. The first question is, what is the difference in support between people who are kinship fosterers and people who are not fostering, but they are relatives who are looking after the children? What difference is the support they get?
There is no difference. So there is training for skills for foster, which if you're a non-relative carer, but also our carers who are kinship carers also get bespoke training. Both get allocated a supervising social worker, but both get the same support. There's no actual difference between the two.
And in which case, why do people choose to foster or not? What triggers their choice?
I think there's a
Thank you. And a follow-up question to that is, those people who voluntarily decide to become foster parents are prepared. They have got the money, maybe their children left home, they've got the bedroom. Kinship carers, it is often sprung on them. They simply take it up because they don't want a close relative to go into care. So they're not prepared, and they need more help, not the same help. In many cases, they need more help. They often have to do modifications to their homes. They have to, I mean, we've got cases where kinship carers have got 4 children and they've taken on another 4 children. And that means the father has to give up work because it's a full-time job for both of them to look after 8 children. They're getting the same amount of money, as far as I know, to the foster parents who have volunteered, who have prepared for this, who've got themselves in a life situation where they can manage it. Why can't extra help be given to kinship carers to encourage them to take on that responsibility? Thank you. And if I may continue, do you want to come up with something now? No. Okay. There's another problem that we have faced, and that is that a closer connection between housing and fostering or kinship caring would be very helpful, because some problems could be solved and children could be placed if there was a quicker response in housing, if some priority was given to people who need the room in order to avoid a child, for example, going into care, which would cost us nearly £6,000 a week. If only the accommodation problem could be dealt with more quickly. Is there any way in which there could be a closer link between the fostering situation and the housing situation? Well, there are specific issues. I won't go into detail now, but the procedure seems to be very clumsy at the moment, and we hope, as the fostering panel would hope, that this could be smoothed out and could be more responsive, because it will literally save us money, big money, if you can avoid a child going into care, and of course it's better for the child as well, if we could deal with those residential issues more quickly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Highfield. I'm curious to understand the journey that a child might go through. So, if we're in terms of kinship care, and where family group conferencing might come into that child's experience, and then in terms of kinship care, how reunification might happen. Is it possible, please, Rachel, that you can just sort of talk us through that? Through the process, what you know, what starts where and what might happen.
So if I take it from the point where there may be a concern, there's a concern for a family, A family group conference is a piece of work where a coordinator brings together family members, most are prepped before then, and that the family themselves may come up with some solutions on how to help the family. What that would be on the basis of the child remaining at home, because that's obviously the key priority we have. However, there are some instances where the child can't remain at home, so at that point people will start to identify who might be able to provide care for that child. In many cases, they will be assessed, an initial assessment just to make sure there's no safeguarding issues, that there is accommodation, that they have a bedroom, all of those sort of things. Sometimes it happens as an emergency. So say, for example, something happens on a weekend or an evening where a family's just come to our attention. Family members may be asked at that point, can you support to help this family in the interim? There wouldn't be chance for a family group conference at that point. However, if the concerns continue on, then we would have a family group conference if it's available. The family would, if it's happened as an emergency, the child is placed with the family, and then there's an ongoing assessment which runs very similar to a foster care assessment, but looks at more of the family dynamics, because that's the more complex relationship. Say, for example, you've got a grandparent and it is their daughter or their son. There has to be additional support given to that family about how they're going to manage the contact, because you've got a relationship there where it's your child and then it's your grandchild, so there's additional support given for that. In many cases, there is additional training because they may not understand what's happened, why their child is... they may find it difficult to believe that what's happened for many grandparents. It can be a bit of a shock. But then they go to panel, as Councillor Julie says, and then they go through the same assessment process.
Thank you. So in terms of family group conferencing, which is relatively new to Herefordshire, do we have, is this a developing service? And for example, what does the staffing look like on that, and the training? What sort of how are we expanding the service? Because it's something we've talked about for a while, and it's great to see that it is actually starting to make a difference to children and families. But yeah, the makeup of it and how that's anticipated to grow would be quite helpful.
So we used to have 2 workers. We've now got 4 workers. We've invested heavily in this service. We've got family therapists, systemic therapists, we've got drugs workers, we've got alcohol workers, we've got specialist workers that know how to support young people in difficult times. We've just expanded it. We've got we're just about to start a HR process, because as you expand a service, you have to expand all the other parts around it as well. However, we've recruited the staff. The staff are working, as I said in the presentation, the number of family group conferences has tripled in the last 3 months, which is great to see. What we did do initially was those families that were in pre-proceedings, so those are the families who are at most risk of losing parental responsibility. We have started a legal process with them to say, we're so significantly concerned with what's happening in your home, we are notifying you that we may be going to court to say we will be taking your parental responsibility. We have all of our families who are currently in that process who have agreed, because it has to be with agreement of the families, have had those family group conferences. And now we've been able to move it upstream. So those families that may have just come through the front door, or those families that may be child in need or an early stage of child protection, we can now offer them a family group conference. So as we increase that team, we've been able to sort of do that part and then move it upstream, which is where family group conferencing should be.
Thank you. So we've got a series of questions, Councillor Kenyon and then Stewart and then Councillor Davies. Can I just ask one thing about the family group conferencing that may come subsequently, but it is just really about the impact, how we're monitoring the impact of that, how that's been captured, and then also sort of what our families are telling us about it.
So our manager of that part of the service provides a report to us every month about what families say. They get feedback after every session and after every intervention. I'm very happy to pass that through to you and to members of Scrutiny. The last report that was done, that's why I know the figures of how many's been done the last 3 months, what the impact of those. 17 children in the last 3 months who were at the edge of care, so they were identified at being at risk of being accommodated, have stayed at home and continue to stay at home. So we review after 3 months and 6 months just to make sure that that intervention that's happened with a family has had the impact that we want it to.
Thank you. I think it would be really helpful to see that report. And Councillor Kenyon, your question.
Thank you, Chairperson. I actually sit on this board, so I know a little bit about it, and I think it's... they're looking for me on camera, are they? They won't find me. Oh, they are. I think it's really well done. There's a lot of professionals sit around that table, and when I go in there, I feel reassured. I ask questions. I'm a bit of a pain, like I am in here, but my questions are answered. So, but I've got a few questions today. Obviously, we're talking about safety here, making sure the child's safety is paramount. After that, it's the well-being side of things. And I've perhaps got a few questions about the well-being, how we help these children going forward. It's a bit like a bank. You want to encourage new people coming in. We're saying what's happened with the new people. It's great to say about the 17 that you've kept on the edge, that you've kept out, which is great, because obviously they're safe. Otherwise, they've been brought inside the umbrella. So that's great work. We've got how many sort of come in each year and how many leave for whatever reason. So what I'm trying to get at is the middle section, and of those middle section, how many are in long-term with long-term carers? So they're settled, happy, almost being better looked after than we could do our own children, because that's how these carers act. They're fantastic. And also, on the back end of it, 16, 17, 18, when they're looking at careers and jobs, what advice are they getting? How are we helping them with, there's a lot of questions here, I hope you've written down. How are we helping them with their career choices? I've been a corporate parent now since the buzzword came in. I feel it's a buzzword. I don't like the word because I don't actually know what I need to do. Now, to get on in life, nepotism is the word. To get on, nepotism. That's how they get first. Now here, actors, if you look at actors within the acting world, they're an auntie or godchild or son or something of someone. Now, can we act a little nepotistic with our councillor roles? If I knew someone was interested in farming, I would put them in my tent and say, okay, come and spend a couple of weeks with me. Someone's interested in the military, the sports, brewing, the pub industry, whatever. That would be great, but we just don't know. And that's why I feel as a councillor, as a corporate parent, I'm letting them down because I'm not helping any of them. I'm sure there's some great examples out there. I say that, I am, but I'm sure there's some great examples out there. And I'm just wondering, have you got any examples of where we have pushed those young people into positions where, they want to get on? They've got a great opportunity because everyone's working for them. They've really got a great opportunity. I hope they're being facilitated to take the opportunity. Thank you.
They are, just delayed reaction. We're corporate parent to 393 children in our care as of today, and a similar number of care leavers. And we're parents, this is the family business, and we need to use all of our networks and our opportunities to find work experience or other roles to help those children and young people move on. Give you a couple of solid examples as you've asked for. Councillor Powell, Ivan and myself meet with children and young people as often as we can of this cohort. One of the young people that Councillor Powell met recently wanted to get into rugby and sport. And obviously that was an immediate quick win with Councillor Powell chairing the rugby club. So again, introduced somebody there. There was a young person who is or was an unaccompanied asylum seeking child. She's a care leaver now. She was interested in becoming a police officer. That's her goal and her dream. Again, Councillor Powell was able to use some connections there to connect her with local police. And I'm pleased to say that very recently, last week in fact, she was accepted, or she's been offered a role as a police community support officer, subject to her passing her driving test, which we're all rooting for her at the minute. And another young person who wants to be a lawyer. I've been able to use my connections with the legal team here to make sure there's a work shadowing opportunity. So absolutely, there are some examples. We need to do a lot more of it and think about how we take seriously our role as corporate parents so that we use those networks that you've described there to the best effect, both as councillors, council employees and our partner agencies as well.
Is there a mechanism then for councillors or within the corporate parenting world, a mechanism for, like Councillor Powell, he was in those situations that is able to help, where other councillors with other skills can come forward and offer those skills?
Yes. So we're just doing a profile, you'll know because it's gone out to corporate parenting board members, we're doing a profile for corporate parenting board members so we can kind of build a bit of a database of skills, experience, networks, and then that's going to go out through Councillor Powell to all councillors as well, so we build that network within the councillor group. We're doing a piece of work tomorrow, similar lines in the all-staff briefing that the Chief Executive runs, where we're asking colleagues from across the council's workforce to register similar similar interests and connections. So that's a piece of work that's started and is ongoing, more to do, but starting to gain some energy now. And I think Councillor Powell wants to come in.
I'll shout. So just to the last corporate parenting board, you'll remember, Jim, you were there. We had a discussion about exactly that, the ambassador role. There is a draft document which is really simple and straightforward. Opportunity to stick a photograph on it as well. Probably the discussion at the corporate parenting board wasn't as clear as it needed to be. So we might be a month behind on that, but I'm literally about to send it out to get people just to volunteer, express what their areas of interest and potential expertise are. So it would be, back to your original point, it would be about giving young people the opportunity to engage in things that they're interested in, to be supported with their job applications, to be supported with some practice interviewing, all the things that we might readily access as parents ourselves for our own children. We need to be doing that. So those two documents actually, they exist. I'm about to sort of promote them, and I would encourage everybody, of course, to subscribe to that where they feel that they're able to do so.
Thank you. We seem to have strayed into the corporate parenting board. I realise that they're very similar items on the agenda. Stuart, you had a question, and then Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was going to be back onto discussion around the kinship carers in relation to the time frame for some of the actions that you were talking about earlier. So from the point of concern being raised through to family group conferences, panel, assessment process, but inclusive also of the training that you discussed as well. Although it may be different per situation, what is the general or average time frame for those actions to be taken? And the reason I'm posing that is if we go back to what Councillor Highfield mentioned in terms of the perhaps additional stresses that kinship groups would have in comparison to somebody who is volunteering as a carer, that we know that services under the county or from referral, some services can take an incredibly long time. What's the time frame for those children to actually receive the care, and then the responsible kin members to have the training, funding, and to feel supported? Because I think it has an impact on how effective all of those measures might be if they're not done over a small period of time.
There's a number of measures within that. For an assessment for kinship carer, you have a first 12 weeks, and that's from the point of first doing your stage 1, so that's where you put all your details in and your DBS checks all the way through to the end, which is 16 weeks. The foster, I don't have the figures for the fostering panel as to how long people, off the top of my head, I'm very happy to present those. Each one will be down to each individual child's situation. So for some children, they may get placed with a carer and then maybe with a relative, and then maybe go back home and then come back out again. It will depend upon a court process. So some of those will be involved in a court process and may also be being supported to have a special guardianship order or another order, or there's so many variables within that, but the one key for either a special guardianship or an assessment is 12 to 16 weeks.
And what it seems you're describing there is an awful lot of parties and stages to go for that process to go through, because it's not just a simple. You were talking about the staffing, for example, increasing. Would the number of staff involved increase the likelihood of the process being supported more effectively? I appreciate there might be a set date or a set time frame for when the action starts and when the action finishes, so that 12 weeks to 16 weeks. But what's the support happening in the meantime, in that meantime, that has a positive impact upon the child as to whatever their outcome of that outcome of that finding might be, whether they go back to the parents, whether they go into care? What's happening in between those 12 to 6 weeks other than the DBS and the courts?
So the child has a social worker, as do the kinship carers, so they get allocated somebody immediately. There may be work that's done by a family support worker that may support the family. I spoke earlier about where there are some challenges in the relationships or understanding. If ECHO are involved, then there would be some additional work perhaps on if there's a substance misuse challenge within a household, because for some family members, they had no idea that what was going on, and for others, they may have known but didn't know what to do. So, but they have their own dedicated family supervising social worker who is separate to the child's social worker. So there are 2 workers involved, and maybe others to support during that time.
Director, did you want to come in?
Alongside that, there's family time arranged, so to make sure that a child maintains the relationship with different members of the family, including the potential carers going forward. So all of that's happening. You asked about capacity and whether if the team had more resources or capacity, it would make a difference. It might in some instances, and that's certainly something that Rachel's working very hard on to build capacity and resilience within the service at the moment. Certainly, if we're able to grow some of our resources, I would expect that we'll be able to see more special guardianship orders, for example, as an outcome being processed during the year. But there are other elements to this, such as the DBS checks, the police checks and the like. They take as long as they take, and similarly, availability of court time is another factor. But it wouldn't matter what different size our team was.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Part of my question has been answered already, but I'm interested in the child that goes into kinship, a child that can express its own feelings, so maybe up to the age of 10. Is there a special conference for them to ask them how they feel about going with a relative? Is their voice heard in that way?
So at the point where a decision is made, the social worker will talk to the child alone to see what their views and feelings are. Majority of our children, I would say, would prefer to be with somebody they know rather than a stranger carer. And then obviously you've got an IRO, so an independent reviewing officer, who will also gain their views. And for many of our children, we have advocates, so that they have a separate person who can gain their views. But the child is always seen alone to check and to make sure prior to that first decision, and continue to be seen.
And what about the children already in the family? You know, sibling rivalry, for example, can happen. So that's one part. And the other is, does the teacher, school teacher, also are they also watching and making notes of how that child's getting on? So does it show up in the school report that they have changed significantly with the change of address, for example?
So for the first part, where you talked about sibling rivalry,
Yes.
that is a challenge both for non-family care, so what we call normal foster carers. That doesn't make it as abnormal, but for mainstream foster carers, it is a challenge for the children that are there. The hypotheses, or when you first make a decision that you're going to move forward to be a carer, may be very different to the reality. That is discussed during the assessment, but then a child gets placed and then there has to be additional support that may or may not be put in. You may have a child that doesn't really like the child that's been placed, or may adore the child and is just too nice to it and smother it. So there are all sorts of variables which happen in all sorts of families. All of those will need an individual response. For a child that's been placed in a kinship, there may already be established relationships, but there may not be an established relationship. Again, it's down to the individual case of that child and that family that will need an individual response. For the second part, you have to remind me again, your second part. Oh, the teachers. So education are a significantly important part of a child's life. Education is a long time. They're in that school for a long period of their day. So teachers know them very, very well. For many children that are placed in kinship care, that means they can stay in their own school and can get the same support they've always had from a teacher. So we take their views very seriously. They're fed back at the independent review. They're also in child in need meetings or child protection meetings and in child in care meetings. So for whichever plan a child is on, education is extremely important.
Thank you.
Councillor Highfield.
Yes, can I follow up on that? I have raised this before. We've got close to 400 children in care. You talk about education. Why can't we put a few of them into private schools? It's £50,000 a year to keep a child at Eton, which is one of the most expensive, and that's about a third of what it costs to keep them in care, and they get a far better education, far better social care. They even arrange families to look after them during the holidays when they can't, for the overseas students who can't go back home. So why don't we consider that?
I'm currently working with a trust that arranges that specific care that you're talking about. We have a group that's working on it. We have identified 2 children, but the child themselves also needs to go. So we're currently working with 2 children who may move into residential school.
I would like to ask about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So I imagine what happened is that while the Three Counties Hotel was taking unaccompanied asylum seekers, that probably the numbers increased because of children coming through that system. Obviously, they have moved on now. Are we still part of a quota from the government? Are we expecting more unaccompanied asylum-seeking children? Is one of the questions. And then also, what typically is the experience of an unaccompanied asylum seeker that comes to Herefordshire? Do we have the facilities, the capacity in the county to actually look after them, or are they being looked after elsewhere? If I can just get a sort of typical example of what's happening, and then possibly look at some of them a little bit more specifically.
Again, I'll start, and then possibly Rachel will chip in. So in terms of numbers, you're quite right. Our numbers did rise whilst there was an asylum hotel in Herefordshire. That's not unusual to Herefordshire. That's been the experience of many local authorities where young adults have been placed in the hotels and then have declared that they are in fact age 16 or 17, or people that were believed to be young adults. I don't kind of pass a comment on the systems that arrive in that situation, but that's the reality for many local authorities. So we certainly saw an increase in the numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children over the past year or so. You're right with the hotel closing, that route in is now closed. We are part of the National Transfer Scheme. Herefordshire has been a proud voluntary member of that scheme for many years and has provided refuge to young people and indeed families from many parts of the world. The National Transfer Scheme became compulsory a couple of years ago now, but we've been a voluntary member and were before that. So we remain a member of the National Transfer Scheme, and there is a quota, as you call it, but it's 0.1% of the child population. So our child population up until very recently was 36,000. It's now 34,000. It's been amended on the back of the last census. So I've lost 2,000 children, which some people would consider to be careless. But nonetheless, our population's changed. So in theory, our quota for the National Transfer Scheme should in future be pegged at 34. We've currently got 39 under 18-year-olds unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. In terms of the experience, obviously, it's been a topic for a while now, and was highlighted by Ofsted in their third monitoring visit. Herefordshire doesn't have some of the infrastructure in place to support unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in both either culturally appropriate placements or some of the support services. So, for example, we don't have enough English as a second language courses. There's no established mosque in Hereford or around Herefordshire or at that time. Some of our availability for example, interpreters and other language or culture-related services has been sparse, to say the least. So the vast majority of our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and young people in the past have been accommodated by us, but then homes found in other areas, whether that be Birmingham or Manchester or more metropolitan, built-up, culturally diverse areas. That's not because we haven't wanted to provide services locally. It's because, again, those services need commissioning or building. I think quite rightly, and at the same time as we were having conversations at the Improvement Board and the like, we're looking at how we build services more locally and make use of some of the established communities that we've got in Herefordshire, where people have come in as refugees in the past. In recent months, there's been half a dozen young people who are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children now living in Herefordshire, and we're working hard to increase the services. We're working with commissioners to try to commission more further education opportunities from September, for example, this year, and working with local communities. We will be bringing our refreshed improvement plan to the Improvement Board next week, and one of the activities that's in there is for the partnership to come up with a strategy and a plan for supporting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in Herefordshire and build the resources that we've got. So it's a mixed picture at the moment. I think it's a fair comment from Ofsted, and I would agree that actually, if you've got a young person who's then placed in a home miles and miles away from the placing local authority and speaking a different language perhaps to many of the people around them, that can feel very isolating, and obviously making visits and building relationships is harder. So we absolutely accept that and are working hard, but equally it isn't just about finding local properties, it's about building a set of services around so that they get the best possible experience.
So, thank you. If young people are being sent out of the county, how effective is sort of keeping, for example, do they still have an IRO service? Do they still have an advocate? And what is the risk of those young people sort of falling into child exploitation, for example? Is that something that is quite real, and is that something that sort of we have on our radar?
So any child placed at distance can be at greater risk. Absolutely. Statistics and research has shown that. So there's been a lot of research about looked after children when they may be causing quite a few challenges within the local area. And some partners and others may say, we need to move them away, it'll make them safer. We know that moving them away does not make them safer, and although they may be challenging here, at least people know them here and can wrap the services around them. We've worked extremely hard to place the unaccompanied young people together. So many of them are placed together, and that allows our worker to go up and visit all of them together. We also have a group, so some of them have set up a group called United Friends, who offer each other support and help. Many of them are placed together or within the closest vicinity, and if there's a challenge with that placement, which there has been for one placement in the last 6 months, we have moved them all together and kept them all together because they come with very little, and so any relationships they make are very, very important to them. Our PAs, so our personal advisors and our social workers are visiting them. We are reviewing those visits to them. So at the beginning, we have put in new expectations, so people are visited much more frequently to build the relationships, as Darryl says. And then we're just reviewing the practice standards to see whether we should be visiting them even further on a more individual basis. But we are doing everything that we can to make sure that they are okay. One of the advantages currently of placing young people at distance is those mosques and other support services are there to support and help them. It's a very difficult area, and we do need to build our services in Herefordshire to make it more appropriate for these young people.
Yeah.
Have an independent reviewing officer who monitors progress against their plan and is independent of the case management. All children in our care have access to or offered advocacy. Not all choose to, but obviously for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, it's also about making sure there's access to appropriate interpreters and the like in that process. Once a child reaches the age of 18, they don't have an independent reviewing officer, but as Rachel pointed out, at that point they have a personal advisor.
Councillor Proctor, thank you.
This is very interesting. Just following this through, what do we know about the preferences of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children? Would they prefer to be based in Herefordshire? Would they prefer to be based where in different parts of the country? What do we know about what these young people actually would like?
Of care leavers recently, I think the picture is mixed. Certainly, Herefordshire is lovely. We all know that, but also it's quite hard sometimes then to find your sense of identity as someone who comes from possibly a highly traumatic background in a country the other side of the world. Some of the young people that are living in Herefordshire now that we've recently found homes for, they're loving it, and they've said that they're enjoying it, and there are others that they appreciate being accommodated with a group of their peers of a similar culture or language, and having access to mosques and community groups and things. So I think it's a mixed picture. I think it will change over time as we build services here. I think one of the big challenges for the group that are currently living here, and one of the challenges for us finding appropriate accommodation, or more accommodation that is appropriate locally, has been the wraparound services in terms of language, culture, religion, education and the like. So I think that's one we will continue to watch. Anecdotally, many young people, if you've fled a war-torn country and seen some awful atrocities against your family and the like, you're just grateful for a home in a safe country. Councillor Powell and I met a group of young people at the Care Leavers Christmas do and they travelled as a group from Manchester and also a group from Coventry, and they felt a real connection to Hereford and Herefordshire. They wanted to come back to be part of that celebration with other care leavers. So the fact that they might be living in other parts of the country doesn't mean they haven't got a strong connection to the team that's supporting them, and I think that's been really quite powerful for us.
Councillor Highfield.
Yeah, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the idea of unaccompanied minors and their integration into this country and into their own traditions. We need a balance there. I'm quite familiar with the Birmingham Central Mosque. I'm friends with the imam there through another connection, and they have a program to avoid radicalisation, but they don't like the idea themselves of Muslim young people who are unaccompanied being thrust into the middle of their local Pakistan Bangladeshi society, which is what it predominantly is. And these children are going to be our future. They're our citizens. They will become our citizens. We're interested particularly not only in their welfare but in integrating them into British culture, British life. Their children will be indistinguishable from us. So when we look at how they're integrated, there's got to be a balance between giving them the cultural connections, but also avoiding them being too slow to be integrated because they're thrust into a non... I mean, there's a lot of new arrivals, for example, in Birmingham, and they're not going to learn how to fit into British society if they're thrust into that community. And I say this without any anti-Islam feeling, because as I say, I'm quite impressed by what the mosque does. But that's a concern of mine, that we've got to find a balance there.
Thank you. Just before we move on from this, I wanted to look at the Educare service, the ECHO service, and just get some idea of how that service is potentially expanding as well, the work that they're doing, and sort of the feedback that we're getting from families who are sort of being supported by them. And then I'd also just quickly like to look at reunification. In terms of the ECHO service, can you just sort of explain a bit of background about the service? As far as I understand, this is also a relatively new service.
The ECHO service has been in place for, well, it's way before I got here, so it's been around for 2-3 years, but we made a decision to increase it because of its successful outcomes. The additional staff have been put in place. What we're now putting in place is the additional therapy, systemic therapists and others, not a whole post, but to expand it. If we're going to be working with more children, then we're going to need more capacity to support those families. I've advised that I will pass on a report about the outcomes because I get that on a monthly basis. The ECHO service we hope will continue to increase, but at the moment it is meeting the needs that we have and is gaining the outcomes that we do need. ECHO itself works with edge of care, so those young people who are on the edge of care, as well as working with some of our young people who are already looked after, and we want to support them to go home and to live with their families. For some of those young people, it may have been a while since they have lived with their family, and so the ECHO service will help with additional visits, with some systemic therapy for the families to understand the changes of dynamics, and also support with that initial family group conference to say who is going to do what to help and support this arrangement to take place. Now, off the top of my head, and I will send you the direct figures, my understanding is they are currently supporting 13 of those arrangements. There are just under 30 placement with parents at the moment. That is where we've previously had a care order. And then what we've said is, actually, you're doing really, really well. You're doing really well, and your child should be able to come home, and we support the family and the young person to reunify within that family. So they're working with those families to support that discharge of a care order. or if they've been moved to another different family member, a special guardianship order.
Thank you. In terms then of reunification, would a child first of all be supported by the Edge of Care service before being considered for reunification, or how does reunification work? Is that a sort of whole separate process?
Well, we have a fast discharge of care order process. However, if I take it back a little bit further than that, if you've got a review takes place every 6 months if there's a child in care, and we are continually considering whether a child should be able to go home and whether it is safe for them to do so. What will normally happen in those situations is we will reassess the parents to say, you know, or a parent may come to us and say, I think I've made these changes in my life. These changes have happened. Assessment will take place, and then a process will start to happen where there may be increased contact, family time as we call it. There may be overnights. So over Christmas, I signed off quite a lot of placement parent reports, as did Vicky, to support children being able to have contact or family time at home over the Christmas period. If that goes well, then we continue to build on it. Each one is individual, but that's how the reunification starts to happen.
Thank you. So would you say that sort of reunification is sort of being successfully rolled out in Herefordshire currently, and is it something that is likely to make an impact on the numbers of children sort of within our care? Yeah.
We've had some dedicated additional resource to support some of the families that we've had to return them home. I do think it's a better process and a better way of us considering children and families being together. I don't think it's about bringing down the numbers. I think it's about if children can be at home, then they should be at home if it's safe for us to do so. It's also about supporting parents to understand. They may have gone through a process, and then how do we help them to understand latterly what they need to do for those children to be returned home. For some children, that's not going to be an option. For others, it will be an option. I do think it's improving, but we've still got a way to go.
Okay, thank you. Just Councillor Harvey wanted to ask some questions. Okay, sorry. Councillor Davis.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm kind of interested in having a perspective on how we're improving from an outcomes point of view, taking up your point that, you know, that if it's not so much about numbers, it's about what the right outcome is for the children. And what kind of measures, what kind of indicators you're using to give assurance that we are achieving improved outcomes as we go through this improvement journey, and also what the hygiene factors are, what the key sort of danger indicators are that you're looking to keep an eye on, that would give you early information about maybe some things not going in the right direction, so that we can leap on those and address them quickly.
There you go. Thank you. So improvements as outcomes. What we have tried to do, and that Rachel's been describing, is fix the whole system, if you like, rather than to kind of focusing on just one part. So we've been working very hard across our service and our practice and with our partners to look at referrals, contacts, multi-agency response to risk across the board. So over the last 2 years, we've seen almost a halving in the numbers of children in need. In the last 4 months, we've seen a reduction in the numbers of child protection plans of almost 60. And we've been seeing this gradual reduction in the numbers of children coming into our care over the last 12 months now, but is now starting to appear in reducing numbers, thankfully. I think the point I'm making there is trying to move away from a historical culture of being risk averse and everything escalating up through the tariff or through the system, if you like. So child in need, maybe not working or we're concerned, goes on to child protection. Maybe not working or we're concerned, goes into being a child looked after. So I think we are showing with our partners that we're starting to make a difference and an impact there now. So we're seeing reductions in each of the child in need, child protection and looked after children cohorts. That's been quite slow to achieve, particularly in the looked after children numbers, because that's kind of the top end of the tariff and the concern. So I think that's been a significant enabler that when we've spoken here in the past, we've been talking about building the foundations or the infrastructure for future improvement, and some of that was about stabilising the service, talking in good and appropriate and challenging terms with some of our partners, and then tackling practice. So I think the service is much more stable. There's much better practice management, oversight and partnership, ownership of risk and the way that we respond to risk. In terms of some of the health outcomes specifically, for children in our care, then we've done a lot of work with our health partners to ensure that those children get health assessments and reviews throughout the year. I think we're in the mid 90% in terms of achievement. As a national indicator, we do far better than most people on that. But ultimately, that's about ensuring that children who may have had experienced neglect in their childhoods before they became looked after, we start to address that and identify that at the earliest opportunity. We're very fortunate that the vast majority of Herefordshire schools are either good or outstanding, and can compare well to other schools that have been mentioned in here. Not non-residential as such, but it's about we've got a really good education set up in Herefordshire, and the virtual school does an amazing job to make sure that our looked after children aren't disadvantaged in that regard. You asked about danger indicators. For me, that's about recruitment and workforce. So, the single greatest risk, in my view, as the director, to continued progress and improvement, and I'm quite clear that we're making improvements and progress. We'd all like it to be faster than it currently is, but there's clear evidence. But the greatest risk factor is stability of our workforce. There's too high a proportion of our workforce still is agency. We've got some amazingly good agency colleagues, but from a family's point of view, too many families experience a change in social worker during a year, and that's something that we need to address. We've got a competitive package. I don't think it's about money, but there is something about how we better sell ourselves as an employer of choice moving forwards. And of course, it's harder when you're inadequate as a local authority anyway. But I think the greatest indicators, if we start to see the numbers of children coming into our care starting to increase again, they've come down steadily over the last 18 months, and we're now performing better than the England average on that one. But again, as Rachel said, it's about being sure that we've got the right children in our care rather than just being focused just on the number. But if that number or that indicator starts to turn and go in the wrong direction, then that's an indicator that something's not right. And similarly, if we can't increase the proportion of our workforce that is permanent over the next year, then that is a significant risk for us in terms of sustainable and embedded improvement.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm looking at the sort of metrics like re-referrals within 12 months and repeat child protection plans. Now, we're nearly 30% re-referrals at the moment in terms of the latest data, and at 37% in terms of repeat child protection plans within 6 months. Are those at what you would consider to be acceptable levels, or are those giving you an indication that we're getting some children boomeranging back because the action that we're taking in discharging them is not giving them a robust environment?
Our re-referral rate is at 27% at the moment, annualised. It's lower than that in the last 2 months, but it's about how you take the data over the year. It was 38% last year, so it's coming down, it's dropping down. I think the England average is around about 20% at the minute, so you would expect to see some re-referral within a year, because the idea is you only stay involved for as long as you need to at the time, and then circumstances might change. There's a lot of work that's going on in the MASH, where those decisions are made around contacts and referrals, and Rachel could say more about that if we need to, and Rachel's leading that piece of work. So so the re-referral rate is moving in the right direction. It's higher than I would like, certainly. I would be much more comfortable if it was between 20-24 in terms of us being an inadequate local authority and what you'd expect to see, but it's come down significantly in the last year. The repeat child protection plans, so there are two figures there. One is within the last 2 years, and the other is ever. Within the last 2 years, we're performing healthily, but it's the ever. When you start to look at the bigger cohort, it starts to jump around a little bit. I think we three share a view as a significant part of the directorate leadership team that that's a symptom still of a risk-averse culture and partnership at the moment. There are more children on child protection plans in Herefordshire than you would expect to see in a local authority this size. That's something we've done a lot of work on with our partner agencies. We've seen a significant reduction in the last 4 months. We've been targeting it and having some tough conversations since the autumn last year, but I think we've come down by nearly 60 in 4 months. And of those plans, there's still too high a proportion that end after 3 months, which raises the question, if the plan can end after 3 months, maybe they shouldn't have been on a child protection plan, and maybe that could have been managed at Child in Need. That's a conversation that's going on across the partnership at the moment. Again, the movement is in the right direction. It's how you get it to move a bit faster, and it's about again, the focus is making sure that we've got the right children who are subject to a child protection plan, rather than just a preoccupation with the numbers. But the numbers are a clear proxy indicator that something's not quite right in the system. It's a lot better than it was 6 months ago. It's certainly better than it was 1 year ago and 2 years ago. It's not where I want it to be at the minute, and where any of the three of us would want it to be at the moment.
Thank you. What about in education, employment and training, and exam results for our young people if we're putting our parental hats on?
Councillor Harvey, can I just ask, is that potentially under the next agenda item on the corporate parenting board? Is that?
Well, I mean, they're both closely related. What I was looking at was really indicators for the service, the service area leads, in terms of the sorts of things that you use as indicators. I'm not necessarily expecting you to comment specifically on where we're at with some of these, as to what sort of measures you're using to help give a feel for how our corporate parenting skills and outcomes are moving, and whether they're moving in the right direction, and which of these measures you think are shiftable and which are, where they are and really difficult and actually represent the picture nationally. So
the conversation around education outcomes in terms of exams and things is a slightly bigger one, and I certainly don't have that data in my head at all. But there's a conversation then about the virtual school at some point, which I think would be good and interesting. Rachel may have it in her head. I know I haven't got it in mine. In terms of education, employment and training, that applies primarily to care leavers rather than children in our care, because children in our care should be at school. And obviously those children aren't the virtual school, and ourselves and schools are all over that group in terms of any children missing education, but of course that gets a bit more complicated with elective home education and the like. Our figures for the cohort that is 17 to 21, particularly in terms of children in care leavers rather, is that it's about 50% of that cohort are in education, employment or training, which is a statistic that is pretty much on a par with both the statistical neighbour and the England average. But actually, fact, if you think about the question and our ambition as corporate parents, that's not good enough. That only 50% are in education, employment and training. Some are unwell and couldn't be in any of those three categories. Some are young parents and again, you'd categorise them differently. But there's a group of young people there who struggle to get into and stay in education, employment and training, and that's something that we're very focused on at the moment. Again, that will be a key part of our revised improvement plan in terms of focus. You know, our ambition is to increase that proportion significantly over the next 2 years, and certainly even at the end of this next year. And some of you councillors are involved in some of the conversations that we're having around creating apprenticeships that are ring fenced for care leavers and the like. And there'll be 4 apprenticeships created in our directorate, in Children and Young People's Directorate, in the very near future, and they should be available to care leavers by the end of May, all being well.
Councillor Proctor, you had a question. Councillor Davies, has your question, you indicated you wanted to speak earlier, was that?
I've nearly missed my slot. To do with ECHO. I just wanted to ask a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just following on from what Councillor
Oh, right, okay. Councillor Proctor first then.
Follow on, yeah. Councillor Proctor.
It's just burst into life. So yeah, just to take that a little bit further, I'm interested in how we know to set an appropriate level of budget for a service that is trying to improve the outcomes for looked after children, wants to be ambitious about them, but we expect there to be fewer looked after children. And I seem to recall that in the medium-term financial plan we're taking, we're getting savings because a big cohort of looked after children are going to age out, and so the council's already decided to take that money away. So how do we negotiate making sure that there's the right level of investment in the service to deliver better outcomes at the same time as expecting to see some savings, because we expected there to be a smaller cohort in that service?
There you go. No, we're on. Yeah. It does. It does. I almost hesitate to get into a budget conversation, but we've had quite a few of those in recent months. But you are right that apportioning the budget in the right places is a constant challenge for us. I think in terms of the 3-year plan and some of the money coming back out over the next 3 years, I'm confident about that. You know, in terms of the numbers of children in care, as they reduce, there will be far less money spent on related placement costs and the like. And also, as our overall numbers of children open to the service reduce, we don't need as many social workers, and obviously that reduces the burden of pressure on agency costs. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're reducing the money that's going to the support for those children. It's kind of associated with that, and I'm comfortable about that, and I'm sure we'll visit budgets again several times during the year. But you know, one of the things that we're very mindful of as a directorate leadership team is there's a huge responsibility to manage within our budgets and to get best value. And you know, Rachel's already talked about wanting to expand our family group conference service this year, so we increased the capacity there to do more around kinship care and increasing the number of special guardianships. And that's a management and leadership task that we're very focused on at the minute, in making sure that the money that we've got, and we're very grateful to the budget agreement that was secured with council's support recently, to make sure that it's put to the best use and the best parts of the service. So it may well be that that's another agenda item for another point in terms of how that's going. I'm sure it will be. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Davies, your question on ECHO.
Thank you, yes. Would you mind explaining again, please, the difference between the family group conferencing person and the social worker? You know, sorry, what is the difference? Because at one time they were only social workers, and now you've got this fantastic group coming in to help. So,
happy to. So there are a lot of people that work in ECHO that have lots of specialisms. A family group conference worker, their main aim is to support a family to come together to find their own solutions. That's at the core of a family group conference coordinator. There are many different ways of doing that, but our particular way at the moment is that we would talk to the family, we would try and reassure them, we would talk to each individual member. A family would put forward, so say for example a mother and a father would put forward people that they think might be able to help. The family group conference coordinator will speak to those members and then bring everybody together, because I mean, I can only speak for my own family. Sometimes when everybody gets together, there can be conflict and differences of opinions. So they help and ensure that everybody that can get together in that meeting is on the same page and is there focused on what would be the best outcome for the child and what support will the family need from them as a group of people to support the outcome that we need.
Okay.
The social worker is completely separate. The social worker is allocated to the child. This is a trained conference coordinator.
And do they meet in between sort of like the family group conference, as, you know, at one time of the month, for example? And then does a social worker then see the child?
Yes, so the social worker will continue to see the child separately along with the different processes.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a set individual piece of work where there may be a first conference, then there may be a follow-up conference, but I'm happy for you to come and see one. That would be a good way forward.
Get the diary out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that would actually be really helpful. So if we can make a note of that. Councillor Harvey, you had another question, then Councillor Highfield, and then it would be quite good to sort of bring this to a close.
Yes, thank you. Leaving home's a big step for any young person, and when you don't have a family of your own to support you in doing that, it's even more stressful. Our young people are termed to be care leavers at 16, which feels very young, and obviously we still continue to be responsible and hope to maintain connections with our young people out to the age of 25. Could you say a little bit about what pathway plans are and how they're used across that care leaving transition, and also how we develop pathway plans for young people in our care who aren't necessarily located in Herefordshire, so ones who may be placed at some distance?
Each young person will have a pathway plan, must be by 17 and a half, although planning will start much, much earlier than that. You're quite right, 16 is very young. We wouldn't encourage any young person to live independently at 16. We do have supported accommodation, so where a young person has decided, as many young people do, I wish to live independently, I don't want to live in foster care anymore, I want to be out in the big bad world. We do have supported accommodation, which allows them to have some semblance of independence as well as having people alongside. We also provide additional support. It's about who is the trusted individual, who is the person that's got the best relationship with that person, with that young person, to support them moving forward. A pathway plan sets out all clear expectations and to inform the young person what we will do and also what they can expect. It is the plan that moves forward. So after the looked after child plan, it is the plan and that sets out the pathway for them moving forward. It should be updated after every significant event or at 6 months, and they are. We've had a group of young people supporting us in co-producing and redesigning that pathway plan, and those are currently being rolled out. I think it's very important. No young person would we want to be alone or not have that pathway plan, but sometimes we have to be extremely tenacious with them and continue to, as you would with any parent, with any child that wishes to go in a different way than you would think. We have to keep in touch and keep on supporting them right the way through to 25. Some young people will step away at 21. Some will say, no, don't want you to be part of my life anymore. And then some of them know that they can come back and do come back. And recently we had somebody come back just before 3 weeks before their 25th birthday. And they needed that support and we gave it to them.
Cool. What level of up-to-date pathway plans do we have at the moment?
I don't have that to hand.
If you bear with me, I'll look it up. But I need to go and access the system. I don't have it to hand.
Just while you're looking that up, one of the things that I noted about Leeds is that they have a team that works with under 25s who have had a child removed. And I just wondered, is there something equivalent in Herefordshire that we do supporting any young families that under 25 age who've had child removed?
We don't currently. We are looking at projects that are similar to Mockingbird. People will have heard of Mockingbird. That sets out that precedent. We are also working with our care leaver group who've had a child. So there's different ways. We've got parents who've had a child removed that may come back. I'm particularly interested in this because I sometimes see that repeat in adoption. So we are looking at it, but currently we don't have that service. What I do say when I have to make an adoption decision, it's probably the most difficult decision you have to make. Someone sitting in our seats. There's a part of it where you recommend what additional support families should get or parents should get. Always make sure that we put in that part so it goes into the court arena is we will offer you support in the future and therapy, because at the point of that difficult decision families go, no, I don't want any help and support, but 6 months down the line or 8 months down the line they may want to, so that gives them in writing the ability to come back and get the support that they need. But many big cities like Leeds or Birmingham, some of the other larger local authorities do have that service. And we continue to look at it.
84% are in timescale at the minute, and the others are being worked on. So.
Right, Councillor Highfield.
I think this is the last question. It goes back to the previous question that Councillor Harvey asked, and this is a theme of hers. I noticed in our last meeting that the Safeguarding Children's Partnership report noted that they had no data analyst. And I think it's important, and I know Councillor Harvey thinks it's important, to have data presented in a way that quickly identifies problems and opportunities. Do you have data analysts for your particular groups, for our children's services overall?
Yes. We do. So there's within the council there's a performance and information team. They compile, collate and produce a lot of our data. Some of the stuff I was looking at to answer Councillor Harvey's question was using a tool called Power BI. So we use technology sometimes to bring together the data and present it. And there are analysts in that team as well. Quite often, in fact, it's we three that are the analysts as well, in terms of we know our business and we know what the data's telling us. So it's a kind of a mix of different approaches there. Have we got enough? I don't think it was a question you asked, but I've read that in there. There's probably more. There's more work that we want to do with our performance team and resources to make sure that we've got the best possible resources going forward, including more an analyst resource. I think that whilst Kevin, when he came and spoke about the safeguarding partnership, was quite right in that the partnership doesn't have an analyst. Each of the partners around that table do have analysts and performance and management information teams. So it's not quite the case that they have no access to data analysis in that process. And I think he tried to make that point, but I'm not sure it fully landed. But the partnership itself doesn't have its own employed analyst in there. There are analysts that we have got access to within the corporate performance team.
So Thank you. I think thank you for that discussion and for the debate. I think it certainly is looking like a much more optimistic picture than it was looking a while back, and it's evident that there's a lot of really hard work going and consideration, hard work going on, and consideration for how the lives of children and their families are improved. So I appreciate that. So I'm not sure if anybody in the committee has any recommendations that they've sort of pulled out of the discussion that we should be making. I just made the observations that it would be good to be able to visit family group conferencing. Potentially we can set that up, and also looking at the virtual school and the virtual head in the future with the work program, if we can add that on. I think that would be really helpful if we look at, again, when we look at education, elective school education. So if we can actually sort of look at the recommendation that the report in respect of corporate parenting services considered. We note the progress made since 2018, and if anybody's happy just to sort of propose that. Yeah, and seconder, thank you. Are there any comments that a cabinet member or officers would like to make further to that?
Just to re-emphasise the point, the potential significant value of what we've termed the ambassador role for corporate parenting. I don't think I need to convince anybody of the important role that we could play, but it might be at a future occasion we might want to look at how effective that is in terms of delivering outcomes for our young people. You've heard a couple of examples that the director's given. They were fairly simple and straightforward, to be perfect. Certainly the two that I was involved in. So where we're trying to apply a degree of sophistication, for example, supporting people to get to job interviews, helping with CVs, those kinds of things. So that might be something we want to look at, the effectiveness of that in the future, perhaps.
Thank you. We'll make a note of that. Right. So if we're all agreed on that report, I can't see anybody that isn't. Thank you. I'm not sure if anybody would like a 5-minute break, or if you just want to. Yes, could we break for 5 minutes? Is on, please.
Yes, Chair, I confirm the live stream is back on.
Okay, I think Jim, if could you let him in, please? Actually. Okay, thank you. If we can move on to the item about the corporate parent panel, if we could, the corporate parent board, sorry. If I believe we have a report which will be led by Victoria Gibbs, who is the Service Director for Early Help and Quality Assessment and Prevention. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And in terms of the report that you have before you today, we've also prepared a presentation. So I've just returned back from annual leave, so I hope that that will provide further richness to the report that's been prepared for me by a colleague in my absence. But if I start with the report first of all. So Scrutiny asked a number of key considerations in relation to the work of the Corporate Parenting Board, including the composition, attendance by elected members, and also whether we have a corporate parenting strategy and action plan in place, the management information and performance that the board uses in terms of receiving assurance for the quality of services and support for our children in care and care leavers, our priorities and how the board monitors and supports the education of our children in care, and how we learn from the experiences of our children in care and our care leavers. So if I start with the recent composition of the board, so following the local elections in May 23, the Corporate Parenting Board reviewed its terms of reference and the membership was endorsed by the board in August 23. Since August and including August, we've had a meeting in August, October, January, and the next meeting of the Corporate Parenting Board is scheduled for tomorrow. In terms of reviewing the terms of reference, we have a wider membership now in relation to officers of the council, elected members and also partner agencies, and I'll come on to talk about the composition when we look at the presentation. In terms of the renewed membership, I think that's brought a renewed focus to the board, its priorities, and a richness in relation to the discussions at the board and areas of specific focus in terms of understanding the experiences of our children in care and care leavers and striving to improve their outcomes and understanding their lived experience. We've also been well supported by the Local Government Association, who have facilitated 2 workshops for members of the Corporate Parenting Board, one in November and one in January, and we've completed a self-assessment exercise as part of the work of the Corporate Parenting Board, which we will review and renew at future Corporate Parenting Board meetings. One of the key outcomes was to start to measure the confidence of members of the Corporate Parenting Board. So we undertook a brief survey following the first workshop in November, which indicated that over 70% of members felt confident in discharging their statutory responsibilities, and we're going to further undertake that survey again to measure the impact of that. We do have a corporate parenting strategy, as you can see from the report, that has a number of key areas. So homes and housing, health and well-being, learning, development and having fun, relationships, identity, belonging, listening, hearing and understanding, our children in care and care leavers, safe and protected, independence and adulthood, and the corporate parenting operational group, which is a multi-agency group, oversees the implementation of those priorities. You have within the pack the current draft of the corporate parenting strategy that we are looking to renew following our most recent 2 monitoring visits by Ofsted. We have amended the timings of the Corporate Parenting Board to engage with our children in care and care leavers. At the most recent board meeting back in January, we had a presentation from the participation worker in terms of some of the co-production that's been happening with our children in care and care leavers, and I'll come on to that in terms of the presentation. And we have planned for 2 young people to attend the board tomorrow as part of widening its membership. Scrutiny asked for the type of information that we use to understand the circumstances of our children in care and care leavers. So we now receive regular performance reports that look at the numbers of children in care, their circumstances, where they are living, the support for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, whether our young people are in suitable accommodation, and their status in relation to education, employment and training. And we also look at the duration of children who are in care too. In terms of the agenda for the Corporate Parenting Board tomorrow, we're also starting to have a focus now on children in care or young people in care, care leavers as parents, and looking at our role as corporate grandparents as well as part of that. So that should hopefully invite some useful discussion and curiosity in relation to our offer. The virtual head is a regular member and standing member of the Corporate Parenting Board, and we do have a presentation by the virtual head tomorrow on the latest outcomes for our children in care and our care leavers in relation to the autumn term report. So there will be additional assurance and discussion in relation to how our children and young people are doing. Most recently, at the last Corporate Parenting Board in January, we had a focus on sufficiency for our children in care and care leavers, so the quality of accommodation, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, as well as supported accommodation for 16 and 17-year-olds who are our care leavers as well. So if I move on to the presentation, if I may, thank you. To just flesh out some of the areas that you asked us to have a look at. Okay, thank you. Kindly, it's been driven by a colleague. So just in terms of the Corporate Parenting Board membership, as I said earlier, you'll see there that we have substantially extended the membership of the Corporate Parenting Board, both from a council officer perspective and also from our multi-agency partners too. The West Mercia Police, we are awaiting them to be able to confirm a representative for the Corporate Parenting Board. But as you can see, that's quite an extensive membership that has provided a different dynamic and a richness of discussion in relation to the needs and support and offer for our children in care and care leavers. Okay, I won't go through it all. In terms of elected member attendance, there you can see attendance for the last 3 meetings of the Corporate Parenting Board. So Cabinet Member for Children and Young People and our Chair, who also represents the administration. And also Councillor Harvey previously attended, but now Councillor David Hitchener has attended since September. Okay, thank you. We do have a corporate parenting programme which is ambitious in relation to its agenda, but is also indicative in terms of our focus and drive to improve outcomes for children in care and care leavers. So we have taken a thematic approach to looking at key areas of support and provision for our children in care and care leavers, as well as having standard agenda items. That enables us to have a deeper dive on some key areas of interest and need for our children in care and care leavers, but at the same time having a regular oversight into performance, into health needs of our children in care and care leavers, and education, and also more importantly the voice and experience and lived experience of our children in care and care leavers. Hence why the agendas are quite ambitious and heavy in that respect. So, as I've suggested earlier, we had a focus on sufficiency back in January. March, tomorrow, the focus is on the physical, emotional and mental well-being for our children in care and our care leavers. And there are a number of reports from our health partners and our commission services in relation to that, as well as having the usual standard agenda items too. And our focus for May is young people at risk of offending, but also preparation for adulthood. Moving on in terms of the work plan, if we can go to the next slide, please. We will be looking and re-looking at our self-assessment and progress, and much more of a focused deeper dive in terms of voice. You said we did, and again moving on to look at education employment again in September. So in terms of a key focus, one of the queries from Scrutiny was in relation to how does the Corporate Parenting Board assure itself in terms of educational provision and outcomes for our children in care. So there is regular monitoring by the virtual school, as Councillor Powell has suggested earlier, and I've reiterated. The report for the autumn term is on the agenda for tomorrow, so we will have much more of a deeper dive and focus in relation to educational provision for our children. We have a focus on the creation of personal education plans and the quality of personal education plans, provision of laptops to support our children and care leavers in relation to their education, supporting schools to prevent exclusion, looking at internships, and also strengthening the careers and education advice and guidance. All of those areas are within our corporate parenting action plan to improve the attendance, but also the attainment and aspiration of our children in care and care leavers. In terms of some of the key impacts, we have 2 New Steps mentors. Our New Steps mentors are there to work with children on a one-to-one basis or a group work basis around resilience, self-esteem, engaging them effectively in learning to support them to participate and succeed. Our education colleagues are recently strengthening that service to provide 2 additional STEPS mentors and also a team leader who will be appointed in the spring term. Oh, sorry, can I go back? Attendance is stable for the autumn term compared with the summer term, and we've had a slight increase to 91.9% for our children in care. Internal quality assurance by education colleagues shows that a vast majority of our personal education plans that are signed off and approved by the virtual school are considered to be good or a very good quality. And you have some performance there and metrics in relation to how our children are progressing at key stages 1, 2 and 4, and also some comparators locally. So at key stage 1, you can see there that our children in care are achieving expected progress that is higher than the national average for maths and also writing. Slightly lower there in terms of reading, so that will be an area of focus for the virtual school and education colleagues. Key stage 2 is more challenging in relation to comparators with the national average, and I anticipate that we'll be having some focused discussion tomorrow at the Corporate Parenting Board in relation to that. But again, at key stage 4, our outcomes for our young people are slightly, a bit more than slightly higher in comparison to the England average. More recently, we have had a successful application with the Department for Work and Pensions to establish a Herefordshire Youth Employment Hub. So that will seek to support young people who are 16 to 25 in terms of positively engaging them in relation to education, employment and training. The hub is expected to open later this month. Within the hub, there will be a coordinator, there will be careers and employment advisors, coaches for young people and mentors to support them in being able to access and stay in education, employment and training. So we anticipate that that will help us significantly in terms of increasing our aspiration for our children and young people, and also increasing the proportion of children and people who are in education, employment and training. And moving on to our performance there in relation to 17 and 18-year-olds and also 19 to 21-year-olds. As Darryl indicated, earlier in terms of their engagement in employment, education or training. So you can see there that for 17 and 18-year-olds, 64%, and 19 to 21-year-olds, 53%. Okay, next slide, please. Moving on to engagement and participation, Rachel's service as a participation officer, which has been working really hard. Chase has been working really hard in relation to re-establishing a number of monthly groups for our children in care and our care leavers that you can see on the slide there, as a range of opportunities for young people to be engaged and to support us in co-producing some of the activities that Rachel and Darryl have already alluded to, such as pathway plans and health passports as well. Those groups are well attended and are groups that have been identified by young people themselves that they would wish to want to be part of. Plans are currently in progress and scheduled to take place for Takeover Day, where our children in care and our care leavers could work with a colleague within the council, or indeed an elected member if you so wished, and also partner agencies in terms of shadowing or wanting to take over an aspect of work or provision on behalf of increasing their understanding and also engaging them wider in activities to support their aspiration. Thank you. Next slide. Young people have told us that they said they wanted more back and forth conversations with senior leadership. Councillor Powell engages with our children in care and our care leavers on a regular opportunity and basis and meets with them regularly. Young people have attended the Improvement Board and have agreed to continue a dialogue with the Improvement Board in terms of the things that matter to and are important to them. We have more engagement from the police with some individual young people. We've already heard about a young person who hopefully will be able to gain her ambition to be able to work for the police, and there's regular engagement with the Director of Children and People Services and the DFE advisor. Young people have told us they want to be more involved in decision making. So they are regularly involved now in terms of our interview panels, and our care experienced council is now starting to be in place and be reignited in terms of listening to our children and young people. They said and they told us they wanted a better service for our young people who are seeking asylum. So we have a monthly group is in place named United Friends, and we had 13 young people attend from 6 cities. We now have designated personal advisors to support our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. We have retained specific legal advice in terms of opportunities and leave to remain. We have some dedicated social workers, and there's also been a rollout of age assessment training for colleagues, and also supporting the wider needs of our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children too. We've already heard that young people have been actively involved in redesigning, co-producing their pathway plans. A smaller group of young people have been involved in writing a job description for social workers that we will use in our recruitment campaigns to set out and detail what our young people want and need from a social worker. And they've also been involved in designing health passports as they leave care as well. You can also see there's a number of engagement groups in terms of celebrating Christmas, but also a special care leavers week as well in relation to some of those activities that you can see outlined. Thank you. Corporate Parenting Board has had a focus on where our children and young people live and who they live with, and we've heard a little bit about that from Rachel's report earlier. So you can see that the breakdown there of our numbers of children who are in care and where they live. So if you look at external foster carers, so who are independent fostering agencies, and our in-house foster carers and kinship carers, and you kind of add that up, we are looking at 71% there of our children and young people in care are in family-based care and support, which is a good proportion of our children in care. It also gives you the numbers of children who are in residential accommodation, supported living and placement with parents. We have suppressed some of the numbers for independent living, parent and baby unit and place for adoption for anonymity purposes because they are small numbers. The Corporate Parenting Board and Rachel Service has had a specific focus on care leavers in suitable accommodation to ensure that they are living in accommodation that meets their needs and is safe and appropriate. And you can see our performance there in relation to 17, 18-year-olds and 19 to 21-year-olds. There's a small proportion where we don't know. That may be because the information's not recorded accurately, or we may not be in touch with those young people recently. The vast majority of our young people are in suitable accommodation, and there's regular oversight from Rachel's service and quality assurance activity in relation to our young people to ensure that they are in suitable accommodation. Some of those young people who may not be in suitable accommodation may be living in with family or friends that we may not consider to be suitable, and we're actively working with them, or they may have decided they want to live somewhere else that's not in line with their care plan. But those young people are reviewed on a regular basis by Rachel's Service so that we understand their experiences. And I think that brings to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any immediate questions? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I was wanting to pop back to the performance in education slide, and I recognise that there's probably a good reason why the figures are compared to, you know, national figures for children in care. But shouldn't we be also showing what their educational attainment is in terms of, you know, children in Herefordshire? Because I think that would paint a different picture, but that should certainly be, you know, an ambition for us.
Yes, it does. You're absolutely right. And the virtual school does measure that as well. And that's included and should be included in their autumn report that's on the agenda for the Corporate Parenting Board tomorrow.
Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Hayfield.
I might be, first of all, am I right that the papers for the Corporate Parenting Board are not public? Because I can't find them on the website.
That's correct. It's not a public meeting.
But other local authorities do seem to make it public. So I have two questions. So one is, why have we taken the decision not to make it in public, and what can we do to ensure that members kind of can be assured that everything's happening that should be happening if we can't see the papers?
The speakers are out to get me. It's a local constitution issue, so different councils can choose to make their corporate parenting board a statutory, a corporate body, and therefore a public meeting supported by its democratic services. Historically, Herefordshire hasn't. That certainly long predates me as an arrangement. I don't have a view, particularly one way or the other, on that. But you're right, some local authorities, it's a public meeting, some it is not. Happy to work with Councillor Powell and as the chair of the Corporate Parenting Board, certainly I'm more than willing to do what we can to make the papers more widely available. It's quite easy to do, to put them on the members' SharePoint site even. There's a relatively simple solution to that. I don't think anybody's asked us before that I recall in my time, certainly. We'll find a solution to that. Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. Councillor Hayfield.
Yes, I don't know if anybody else wonders about these figures. around 50% in employment between 19 and 21 doesn't sound very good to me. And also I noticed the key stage 4 expected performance was like two out of 3 are failing, basically. And that's in Herefordshire, where I believe somebody said a little while ago that we have an excellent education system. So why, when they've reached that stage and have presumably been in the system for a while, are we? The figures don't look very good to me.
I think that whilst there is better performance in relation to comparing with the national average at Key Stage 4, every young person is unique in terms of their needs. Some of our young people have suffered extensive trauma, and therefore that does affect their learning and their development, and being able to achieve at Key Stage 4 and beyond as part of that. That's something the virtual school are very cognizant of in relation to the additional support that they do put in to support our young people and update on a regular basis in relation to that. But I think there's significantly more that we should be doing in terms of being able to support our young people to achieve.
Follow up. I noticed you talked about shadowing. Internships is one thing, I think that's great, but do we do work experience? Do we provide work experience for these, which comes at an earlier age normally? I know my granddaughter who's 16 has just been to Dubai for 2 weeks to work with a company, and that's changed her whole view of what her future ought to be, completely changed it. So do we do work experience opportunities for them? Because we've got counsellors who can help with that.
We certainly do, again, partly through the schools, because they're placed in mainstream schools, but also the virtual school champion. That I can't promise that will all go quite as far afield as your family member, but yeah, we're absolutely keen that we do that as much as we can. Again, the virtual, some of the figures, the virtual school provides much more information in much more detail to the corporate parenting board, because obviously some of the cohort have special educational needs as well, which affects their attendance and attainment over time, and also where a young person is placed out of the county and further afield, it's the relationship with the local schools is slightly different. But yeah, absolutely, work experience is really important in helping young people kind of formulate their plans and their thinking about their future careers and learning.
Yeah, as long as they're not used to make the coffee and do the photocopier. Fortunately, my granddaughter was allowed to sit in on board meetings and things like that, as long as she kept her mouth shut. And that was a really transformative experience for her. Yeah.
The other thing about work experience as well, and both Darren and Councillor Powell have talked about this earlier, is in relation to the corporate parenting ambassadors and champions. And actually that is another offer that we can all provide to our young people in terms of work experience, as well as apprenticeships, as well as shadowing opportunities and internships in terms of supporting their education, employment and training. So that's something else we hope to capture by that process too.
Councillor Harvey, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Councillor Highfield's point about the attainment at stage 4 and the comments that you've made about some of our, particularly young people in that age group, having experienced quite traumatic situations. That's not a surprise. You know, and that is not something that, you know, is suddenly different here in Herefordshire. So we should have a system that is geared up to, you know, to cope with that and to provide the additional support and wraparound and everything. Because once you've gone through the sausage machine of the education system and been spat out the other end of it, you can't go back and go round the boy again on it when you're feeling in a better place. So, you know, failing to make the progress and to get the exam results that you're capable of, you know, is going to affect you for the rest of your life.
in many regards, I agree with you. Also, in my experience as a social worker for many years now, in fact, I can think of a number of young people that I've worked with personally as their key worker and social worker who do go back around the boy, as you describe it, and then where they weren't able to make the best of their education or access education during their school years, but then in their older adolescence and early adulthood, go back and have a second go at it and get the qualifications that they want because they're in a better place and better position to access learning. I don't think there's a rule generalised. You can't overgeneralise either of those things, but I think the important thing that I suspect we both absolutely agree on is making sure that the support that we put in place for children who might be traumatised is reflecting the trauma that they've experienced and thinking about how they access education when that feels right and that we're addressing the trauma that they've faced.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's your experience that they can go around the boy, is it the case that we provide the support and opportunities and all the rest of it to enable them to do that when, you know, we're seeing the figures that we've got that, you know, only 50% we're actually remaining in contact with in that a older age group?
So the 50% is not who we're in contact with. That's about education, employment, and training. We're in contact with 90-odd%. But so yes, there are a number of our care leavers who are now doing college courses or access courses to top up their qualifications or to kind of go at that again because they want to realise their ambitions. But you're right. We've talked about the 53% or thereabouts of children who are in education, employment, training, and then obviously the converse aren't. And that's something that we're very focused on at the minute, but our performance isn't out of kilter with others, but it certainly doesn't reflect our ambition. We need to have a much higher ambition shared with all counsellors, not just the counsellors on the corporate parenting board, about how we create, you know, work shadowing opportunities, learning opportunities and others. And it might also be worthwhile thinking about the committee revisiting the work of the virtual school at some point during its forward work plan for the year, because I think again they can add a different context to some of this. And one of the things that we're asking the virtual school to do at the moment is come back to my leadership team with some options for extending its remit so that it covers care leavers as well, which it currently doesn't do.
Yeah, can I just say, you know, I'm 100% in favour of encouraging counsellors both to, as Councillor Powell has already done, use their own work and life experience to provide opportunities for looked after children, but also to act as ambassadors within their own communities to encourage local businesses and other organisations to similarly provide those sorts of opportunities. But actually, every single aspect of this council's operation offers opportunities to do that. And in the same way as we have, you know, a transactional relationship with every single household that is just about to have a council tax bill flop on their doormat, you know, every single business in this county has a transactional relationship with this council where they're paying their business rates. And to add a little bit of information into those pieces of communication that go out every single year to every business, every single household, saying, you know, is there anything that you can do to help support looked after young people in this county and provide them with work experience, job opportunities and all the rest of it? Are we making the best use of our own networks as a local authority and our connections to the business community and the educational and third sector? I mean, maybe Councillor Powell.
So very specifically on that latter point, I've had a number of conversations with Councillor Biggs, who leads on that particular portfolio and business. I think it'd be fair to say, you know, we'd acknowledge as there is, you know, as you've exactly articulated, there's more opportunity than we're currently taking, but it isn't that those conversations aren't taking place with a view to moving those forwards. But I accept your points.
And yeah, even this morning, so Rachel and myself were at the corporate leadership team for best part of 2 hours, looking at some of the enablers for our improvement plan A key part of that was about how we extend and develop the range of apprenticeships that might be available across the whole of the work of the council. For example, each directorate being challenged to create some apprenticeships by the chief executive. We've also got it built into some of our contracts with providers where we commission work out to external providers like BBLP and the like, so that again they also create apprenticeship opportunities and learning opportunities for children in our care leavers. Hadn't thought of the idea about putting a leaflet in with the council tax bills, but we'll certainly pick that one up as well as something for the future.
Councillor Proctor.
Just while we're throwing corporate parenting ideas out there, the LGA training module on corporate parenting has a couple of things in it which it suggests a good local authority does, which includes a standing item on full council about what's been happening to look after children, perhaps celebrating successes, and also a mechanism by which members of the council can write cards to celebrate looked after children's successes, and I'm sure there would be a lot of support for those sorts of things around the council.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, if I could ask a couple of questions about the appendix to the report for this agenda item. I was confused about this because although the report itself references the appendix and says that it's a draft of the forthcoming corporate parenting strategy, which I note is coming to Cabinet in April sometime, it's dated 2022 to 24 and it isn't marked as draft. So I read it and took it to be the corporate parenting strategy that is currently being worked to. Now, that's fair enough. I'm glad we've got one and that it's providing some structure to the board and its meetings. But in terms of updating it, it needs to go further than 2024. It needs to have its date pushed out, and you know that needs to be clear in the documentation that is being shared.
You're quite right. It is the current corporate parenting strategy, and apologies, I hadn't seen that. We are going to refresh this and make it more aspirational. We've had 2 monitoring visits, which will also have given us some additional things to think about, and also how we respond more to our young people who have individual needs. So it is going to be refreshed. It's also going to be done alongside our young people. And with some of our parents as well. I did note, and Daniel sent me a note about April, it won't be completed by April, but we are working alongside to make it a more in-depth and aspirational document. Thank you.
Well, in that case, could I ask that you update the forward plan so that it's clear when it is going to come forward?
Yes.
And I could run on the spot with frustration that we've dedicated this entire agenda to the Corporate Parenting Board, and, you know, in whatever draft stage that it's in, it hasn't been possible for us to be able to make an input to that developing update in this meeting.
Councillor Highfield.
Yes, and can I ask that the updated one, this existing one is full of flowery and aspirational claims. Let's be a bit more down to earth with the next document, please. A bit more substance and a bit less. You used the word aspirational. I think it's too aspirational as it is.
Can I just ask in terms of is there the action plan that actually goes alongside this strategy? So is that have we had sight of that action plan, or are those how do we know that these aspirations are sort of have been achieved, or sort of what the progress is on that?
That is the work that's being undertaken by the Corporate Parenting Board. So they scrutinise the plan. And each particular aspect of it. Very happy to share the plan. I think it'd be something good for you to look at. And if you wish to add or adapt any of the, or give some good feedback, I think that would be helpful for us.
Yeah, thank you. I think that would be really good. One of the questions I had about this was the work on life stories. So I know that is also one of the sort of aspirations, and one of the things that young people have said is that they want to have that better sort of connection with their families. Has there been quite a lot of work on life stories? I know that it was something that was flagged up at some point, I think potentially by Ofsted, but it would be good to have an update on that.
So there are two types of life stories, many different types of life story. It's about a child understanding their journey, where they've come from, and then supporting them to understand that journey so that they can move forward. The life story or life journey work that is done with a child is done as a continuation. And part of the criticism from our colleagues at Ofsted was that we weren't evidencing it well enough on the file, as well as some children not getting it. So there were two aspects to that. There's been a full training programme for a number of staff, and there are some parts of service which excel at it. So our Children with Disability Service are completely excel, and they are working through and supporting other managers so that they can give the same care and attention to their life story work with their young people. There is also a second type of life story work which is more therapeutic and can have unintended consequences. So it's more of a longer term piece of work that is done sensitively, and we are currently in discussions with Finance and Commissioning about where we commission that from. We currently spot purchase it, but we know a lot of our young people will have gone through quite traumatic experiences, so we want to get in a more established relationship with a provider to move forward. So we spot purchase at the moment, but we are currently working with Finance and Commissioning so that we have more of a dedicated response to that. Our HIP service does do some life story with young people alongside our carers, but we're trying to expand that further.
Sorry, the HIP service is the...
It's a commission service that supports...
Herefordshire Placement Support Service.
Thank you.
Okay.
Herefordshire Placement Support Service.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, yes. I recognise that there may well be some really good reasons why we've chosen as a local authority to hold the parenting board meetings not in public, but given the journey that we're on, I'd like to suggest maybe a recommendation for consideration is that there is some element of public meeting that the parenting board holds, maybe not all of its meetings, but a window in on that, and consider whether there would be benefits in doing that in the context of, sharing and making visible the work that we're doing as part of the improvement journey. And the other question, the question that I've got is at Appendix 6 to, it's a bit recursive, at Appendix 6 to Appendix 1, which is the current corporate parenting board strategy, it talks about scrutiny. And I mean, one of the reasons that we've dedicated this agenda today to the service and also to the board is really to make public and make visible the work that isn't because of the nature of the board's meetings. But given that it reads here as if the elected members who are appointed to the parenting board fulfil a scrutiny role of the work of the board in its own right, how do they go about doing that? And if it isn't them, and there is a scrutiny role for elected members who are not members of the board, how is that scrutiny role fulfilled, or how has it been fulfilled prior to us dedicating this meeting today to the matter?
So I think you're asking us to look at our relationship in terms of the openness of the meeting, but without necessarily going back to change the constitution of the council. I think so. Certainly happy. Just a quick conference there with Councillor Powell. We're quite happy to look at all of that and think about the options about how we do that. Certainly, we've got a parents group going on at the moment that Rachel's facilitated and run. In terms of the spirit of restorative practice. That absolutely fits with what we're trying to do anyway. So we will go away and look at the options. Quite happy to have conversations with you outside of the meeting as well about your thoughts on that. And we already had the question earlier on about how we share the papers of the corporate parenting board with members, and we've already committed to doing that, to making sure that there's a link to all members. So hopefully, there's a bit more thinking we probably need to do around what you're suggesting. But certainly, there's no resistance to that on our part.
And the scrutiny question? Appendix 6 on page 69 of the agenda pack is entitled Scrutiny in the context of the Corporate Parenting Board strategy. And it says that councillors play a fundamental role in protecting and supporting care experienced children, and that elected members will scrutinise the delivery of the aims and principles set out in the strategy for the Corporate Parenting Board.
So I agree with the statement. So I guess there's something about how we how that's fitted with the forward work plan of this committee, isn't it? Or how often you want to do it. And again, part of your recommendation can be how you want. So the Corporate Parenting Board reports to a number of people. It reports to the Improvement Board. It reports in part to the Health and Wellbeing Board. It can also report here. So it we can be guided by you in terms of how you would like scrutiny to exercise its scrutiny function and the relationship with the Corporate Parenting Board. I think there's an acknowledgement in the question that you're asking that we haven't got the relationship right, and I'm quite open to that suggestion.
But my point is, I was unclear as to how to interpret this appendix. Is it that the councillors who are appointed to the parenting board, which meets in private, undertake that scrutiny function of the parenting board as well as being present at it, or is there a scrutiny of the work of the board that is the responsibility of other members not actually sitting on the board, maybe us? And if that's the case, how has that scrutiny function been being undertaken prior to us dedicating this meeting here to introducing the subject?
So the primary function and purpose of the members who are members of the Corporate Parenting Board is to drive the corporate parenting strategy and ensure that and officers are delivering on it, and to make kind of policy strategy decisions around that. Children's scrutiny has a much broader, as you know, far better than I do, a much broader scrutiny function in that it can call in and scrutinise any executive decision and any of the work of the partnership that serve children and young people in Herefordshire. So, and as it's done today, as you quite rightly pointed out, it's made a significant part of the agenda focused on this. In terms of how has it done it before, certainly in my 2 and a bit years here, it's probably only had maybe one other detailed exploration of corporate parenting in that time, although corporate parenting has come up at many points in other conversations. And that's the challenge of the Scrutiny Committee, about how it exercises its function over such a broad area of practice, and how it gives sufficient time over a municipal year. Councillor Proctor was speaking earlier on about, for example, that a council might have a standing item on corporate parenting, And again, Scrutiny might want to do something similar, not as a substantive item, but as a briefing note at every meeting that they ask officers, myself and my team, to produce a briefing note in terms of some key indicators or key activity around children in care, and we could do that, and so that became a standing item for information, if not for full discussion. We'll be guided by you in terms of recommendation. What you clearly won't have is time to dedicate to corporate parenting every meeting in the way that you've done today.
Yeah, I think in that case, could I ask that Appendix 6, when the strategy is updated, clarifies where the responsibility lies for undertaking that scrutiny role, and also clarifies the role of the elected members who are appointed to the board?
Councillor Kenyon, did you want to add something?
Yeah, as a councillor that sits on the board, and I've attended one meeting. I didn't realise I was on it for the first 6 months of it. That's the role I feel I do. I scrutinise and I feed into it, but I feel that's what I do. And there's also Councillor Hitchener, who's a very experienced councillor who sits on her as well. So I feel there's sufficient scrutinisation at that stage. I know what you're talking about here. I've come along to this today, but I've sat here this afternoon and listened to this, and I'd just like to add that I've sat on a lot of committees in the last 12 years. I've been a councillor or so, and I would say that committee is one of the most professional committees I've sat in and sat around on that table. And when I sit there, I look at the people around it, and I think they're all pushing in the right direction. So I'd like to say that. If I thought for a second there was an issue with any of it, I'd be coming back to here, or I'd be shouting and I'd be taken up with a cabinet member. I don't feel there is. I feel it's in a good place, it's moving in the right direction, so it should be applauded rather than sort of knocked, dare I say.
Thank you. I don't think anybody's actually knocking it out. We can look at this. The way that I read it is that elected members will scrutinise the delivery of aims and principles through the corporate strategic partnership board, which is the board that you sit on, Councillor Kenyon. So that's the way that I read it. But we can have a look at it and sort of make sure that the wording is right as your feedback. One of the points that I just wanted to sort of ask about was the voice of the child, and do we feel that the voice of children in care and care leavers is influencing policy and service provision through this board in a sufficient way, or is there more that can actually be done in terms of how young people influence decision makers and strategies and development plans in Herefordshire?
This was designed by the same people who do the flappy paddle gearboxes on Audi Quattros. You press a button and it might change gear in 4 or 5 seconds. That's how they work. So the same people.
Other makes of car are available.
Thank you. I think that's a fair question, a fair challenge. We're on a journey in relation to that. We have a renewed commitment from the Corporate Parenting Board to directly hear from the voices and lived experience of our young people. Our participation officer in Rachel's service has been working with a small group of young people in terms of supporting them to be enabled to attend the board. So that they can feed back their views directly. So that should be happening tomorrow. But running alongside that, there are lots of other opportunities where young people have started to influence operational delivery, such as co-producing pathway plans, which is challenging us in relation to our offer for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. They are also engaging with our partner agencies in terms of co-producing health passports for our care leavers. So there are a number of different opportunities that young people can influence the work of the board. I think there's more to do there in terms of that, and that's about how we support and enable young people to feel comfortable and confident in being able to attend in person, but also to be able to engage with wider members of the board in terms of influencing that strategy. As Rachel suggested as well, the refresh of the strategy will take a more of a co-production approach with our children and young people.
Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Highfield.
So I guess I'm conscious that this committee does not really have young people talking to us directly. So what lessons have you learned that would be useful for this committee as it tries to involve the voices of children and young people?
I think in terms of that, the Corporate Parenting Board had heard directly from children and young people before. That predates me. I think that was quite a smaller group of young people and probably didn't reflect the diversity of children and young people's experiences. So that's one of the lessons we've learned in terms of that. It's about careful preparation so that we can get active engagement and true engagement of young people for them to be able to challenge us in terms of how we can improve our offer to them and our support and care for and to and with them as well. One of the areas that we will be looking at future corporate parenting boards and probably goes back to a comment made earlier by Councillor Highfield is in relation to starting to write our reports in much more of an accessible format for children and young people and writing them in a way that engages them and is more down to earth, as it were. Again, that's something else that we've learned from. I think it's about how we take all of the experiences of our children in care and care leavers from the various different support groups, activity groups, but also we are running at the moment the Coram Bath Bright Spots survey for our children in care. So we expect that survey to report in the next few weeks. That will give us a good understanding of the things that are important to children in care. And our care experienced young people, and we should absolutely be using that to inform the work and drive and ambition of the Corporate Parenting Board and the refresh of the Corporate Parenting Strategy and Action Plan.
Yeah, that's useful, and we've heard in previous meetings that the service has got some issues to do with how data is captured and managed, used and reused in an efficient and effective manner. Also encouraging our staff to make sure that they undertake the documentation that needs to be done in order to provide the evidence that's needed that we're doing what we say we're doing when others come and look at us. I recognise that giving young people the opportunity to come and attend in person these sorts of meetings is a really important way of training and giving young people experience of not only speaking in public in a big meeting, but also advocating for the needs and interests of their peers, and speaking up for themselves, which young people who've been care experienced probably really need to have that as a skill, as a life skill, before they go out into the world. I'm just wondering whether given that there are as many face-to-face engagement opportunities just in terms of, day-to-day engagement with the young people that are part of our encounter our service, how our systems help gather that information and those individual voices in order to be able to integrate them and feed them into this sort of a forum, so that we don't overburden the young people who do come as representatives of care experienced young people in having to network themselves with lots of others in order to get an integrated view, and that they can actually have some information or access to information that enables them to synthesize the kind of issues that they then need to represent on their other young people's behalf.
I think recognising for us it's a work in progress at the minute, and it's from what was from, as you know, a very low base insofar as there was very, very little participation and engagement activity, certainly 18 months ago. So now we've got a Children in Care Council. Our Young Persons Council met for the first time earlier today. And then we've got the groups and things that we talked about in other parts of the presentation. So there's lots of pieces of work that are individual. The question or the point about trying to bring that all together so it's synthesised into clear messaging, that's a work in progress. And young people are helping us kind of in terms of co-producing that participation strategy at the moment, rather than us just do it and assume that that's how they want to do that. We're getting some interesting challenge and interesting messages from that, and I think that's important for us. I think Councillor Proctor asked a question about the messaging from young people. If anything, one of the clear messages that I've been hearing very recently is just get on with it. In terms of when as a council we say we are going to create X number of apprenticeships, then actually fact most young people go away thinking there's going to be an apprenticeship and I'm going to apply for that next week. And of course it can take 2 to 3 months to set up a post and an apprenticeship. So there's something about the clarity of our communication and then pulling our finger out and getting it done, because it's about raising expectations in much of what we do, and then perhaps at times leaving some young people and children feeling let down because it's still not happened, or we've been talking about it what will seem like an endless amount of time, but that's fact we're going through the motions of creating posts. So you know, it's an acceptance that it's still somewhat piecemeal. We're working with children and young people to come up with a more coherent strategy. The Bright Spot survey that's been mentioned by Rachel is a big piece of work for us, and it will be a really clear benchmark when we get that report. We'll share it certainly with Children's Scrutiny Committee and all members, and again that will help us think about the next conversations that we have.
Thank you. I think, Councillor Davis, you had a question, but if I could just say, when I was looking into this, and again, I went back to Leeds, you know, as our improvement partner, and I know that they have a voice and influence team that supports how children and young people sort of participate in decision making, which includes kind of universal, but then send and then social care seldom heard. So I think potentially as we move forward, and I realise that we've come from a low base, but you know we could look at you know how Leeds is doing that, and how we are actually building capacity within young people throughout the county, not necessarily just within our care leavers or looked after children, but sort of across the board in engaging in decision making. I think would probably be quite helpful. Councillor Davis, did you have a question?
No, it was sharing.
It was me next.
Oh dear.
Councillor Hayfield.
No, I defer to Councillor Davis. You've got something useful to say.
Well,
Carry on.
yes.
Carry on.
John Coleman has agreed that the young children from the Queen Elizabeth School in Bromyard, so many of them, can come in. We're just waiting for a date now. Come in to see how we run, and maybe that could lead on to apprenticeships. Who knows? But that's the first one. So we hope there's going to be many more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hayfield.
Yes, your strategy opens with an open letter from children and young people with care experience. That has an even more distant relationship to the truth than a recent published picture of the Princess of Wales. This was not written by any young children. What we need is, in your relationships with young children, we need a bullet points of what they're saying, complaints or praise. This letter, if any of our children in care wrote this letter, then they are destined for Cambridge, because it's a myth. It's what we think they're saying to us and not what they're really saying to us, and it's not a good way to start this strategy, honestly. Have you read it?
Yeah, I did read it, and perhaps you can take that feedback sort of when you look at that. I'm conscious of the time, and also just wondering if are there any other particular points on this corporate parenting board that anybody wants to raise, and whether there are any recommendations that have sort of come out of this discussion that anybody would like to bring up. Councillor Proctor?
The potential recommendations I noted down were making corporate parenting board papers available to members and exploring ways that they can make at least portions of the meeting public. considering placing an update on the council agenda to inform more members of what's happening with our children, and developing a mechanism to enable members to write letters or cards of congratulations if looked after children do something successful. And I guess a recommendation for us is to consider having a standing item on corporate parenting, standing update on corporate parenting for information at our meetings.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, there was also the clarification of the role of councillors on the board itself, and also the role of scrutiny, and who undertakes that.
Okay, the scrutiny officer, would you like to comment on that
Yeah,
point?
if I might, because I think this is a recurring issue at Herefordshire Council and other councils about the role of various boards and how that relates to scrutiny. And it's quite common within the Health and Wellbeing Board, within safeguarding boards, to refer to the business as involving scrutiny, but really those groups are more like work coordination boards. They're there to drive specific pieces of work and to coordinate to agree with that, as you could see with the work programme for the Corporate Parenting Board earlier. So I think whilst the suggestion of a recommendation is sound, I think there's probably a wider piece of work to be had around how scrutiny relates to those boards and clarifying their respective roles throughout the council. So I'm just thinking that's perhaps a conversation to have within the Scrutiny Management Board or within scrutiny itself, rather than making a recommendation on this particular one, only because it's an issue that crops up elsewhere as well.
Councillor Harvey, are you satisfied with that? Could we sort of have a look at that?
I haven't got a problem having the broader conversation, but I think the points that have been made specifically relating to this strategy, which is in the process of being redrafted and updated, still stand.
Okay, if we're all agreed that to have a look at that, and make sure as we're feeding into, as the strategy is developing, that we actually clarify that position. And
the reason that I'm saying it still stands is because Councillor Kenyon, who's a member of this committee and he's also a member of this board, is saying that he feels that he undertakes a scrutiny function whilst he is acting as a member of the board. And if there is an element of that in terms of the role that the elected members appointed to the board perform, then they need to understand that, and they need to be clear about how they evidence that they're fulfilling that role as part of their activity on the board itself.
I don't see that what Councillor Kenyon does precludes what the Scrutiny Committee does. If Councillor Kenyon's, as I'm sure he is doing a good job watching what's going on that board, and our Scrutiny Committee will, if we so see fit, scrutinise as well. What's the problem with that?
There isn't a problem, it's just a case of making it clear to the members who are appointed to that board that that is something that they need to be aware that they're doing while they're sitting on the board, and the board will meet many more times a year to consider corporate parenting than we ever would consider corporate parenting on children's scrutiny.
Purpose, Councillor Kenyon, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that was clear as day. That's the reason I'm there. I'm there to represent the people, the people of Tupsley and Herefordshire Council. That's why I'm there. It's yes, they want to get into this fantastic mind I've got in here, but also I'm there to see what they're up to and report back if I've got any issues or worries or problems, and I haven't. So I feel this scrutiny committee can get bogged down by too much of this, when actually there's some really good scrutiny that we can be doing. Again, that's for another day. A work. When we have a meeting about the work and what we do, work program.
The
yeah,
work program.
absolutely. But I don't see why we need to go on about this.
Perhaps what we could do is actually just make sure that the terms of reference for the membership of the board includes the clarification about the fact that they scrutinise the delivery and aims of the board. Is that a way through it? Would anybody like to comment on that? Perhaps we could do it that way, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, I mean, all I was asking for was some clarification of the wording in the existing strategy. It is an appendix to the existing strategy.
Okay.
We'll work with the scrutiny officer and others. We'll clarify the wording in the strategy.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
Thank you. If we could have that clarification. So we've got 3 recommendations coming from that. Could have those recommendations been captured?
Yeah. I think at the moment they're not entirely clear. So
Okay. Can we Right, thank you. So if the scrutiny officer can please read out those two recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. They're as follows. Herefordshire Council to suggest proposals to make board meetings more accessible to elected members and the public, and Herefordshire Council to extend opportunities to write letters and cards celebrating the success of its looked after children.
Thank you. Is everybody in agreement with those? Yes.
Can I just, I think the wording was that the board is made, it needs to be specific, it's the corporate parenting board.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Could you just read that out again? Just
sure. Of course, Herefordshire Council to suggest proposals to make the corporate parenting board meetings more accessible to elected members and the public.
Okay. Everybody in agreement with that? Yep. Thank you. All right. So thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of our business. Thank you very much to everybody who came and presented. Thank you for your time and for the information. And I thought it was actually really helpful to see how the service runs and how the board runs. The date of the next meeting is Tuesday the 7th of May at 2 p.m. And it's not actually the 12th of March, which is listed on the public agenda pack, because that's today. So could the committee please note and approve proposed dates for committee meetings for the year 2024-25, which are the 7th of May, the 30th of July, 17th of September, 26th of November, and then 2025, the 21st of January and the 18th of March. I would like to thank everybody for attending. Can I ask that unless they have any formal business, all attendees other than council members and officers, please exit the Plough Lane site. And before I close, can I check the Democratic Services team with the team that the live stream has been switched